What is up, everyone, and welcome to a Q&A with a pizza flow in the background. Here, I'm baking off about 12 pizzas, and I'm only par baking them because I'll be taking them to a friend's house to finish them off in like a home-style oven. So luckily here I got the Totoven, and I got my Polish pizza dough recipe, so sit back, enjoy. Now, the first question I have here is how to adapt to warm weather for fermenting pizza dough. Now, this is a great question because not everybody has a steady, constant room temperature. When I say room temperature in my videos, I mean anywhere from 70 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Any of my recipes that ferment at room temperature should be suitable for this temperature. However, if you are in a hotter place, I would definitely suggest using only cold fermentation. So yes, it's harder with my recipes, but for instance, my last video making Canotto style pizza, that was 100% cold fermentation. To be successful with cold fermentation, you can use pre-ferments, and they can ferment at room temperature. They actually benefit more from warmer temperatures. At room temperature, your Polish or biga or sponge, whatever you're using, will actually be more active up until 85 degrees Fahrenheit is the maximum I would have a pre-ferment or sourdough starter fermenting. So the next day or 8 hours after fermenting your pre-ferment, I would add it to your dough, mix it, and immediately put it in the fridge. The only variable you have to change is the amount of yeast. So if you're using a cold ferment, maybe double up on the amount of yeast for your pizza dough recipe. Now I hope this helps. It definitely will for those who live in a warmer climate. For a colder climate, however, you want to utilize the room temperature you have, whether it be 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And the same thing, but without cold fermentation, you're gonna have to double up on the yeast and allow more time for your dough to ferment at room temperature. Now let's move on to the second question / category. A lot of people are commenting about sourdough baking. Now, during the COVID years, I was doing so much sourdough baking. I love baking sourdough bread. However, for pizza, it is difficult. I'm not discouraging anyone to steer away from it. I will definitely bring more sourdough recipes to my channel. And the first question here is how to make a simple sourdough starter and how to feed it. How I made my sourdough starter around 7 years ago in Italy. I took grapes and persimmon, the fruit, and I fermented it. How I made my starter, I started by using one persimmon and a bunch of grapes, and I kept them kind of, dirty with natural yeast on the outside. I didn't wash these items. Then in a bowl, I scrunched it up and crushed it with my hands, another quote-unquote way to add bacteria to the sourdough. On top of this fermented crushed fruit, you do want to add around 100 to 200 grams of water and then mix it up. And after this, I simply left it to ferment covered in a dark place for 24 hours. The water and the juices from the fruit are going to ferment overnight and get a little bit fizzy or bubbly. Now the next day, after that 24 hours, you will need to strain the juice from the fruit. The fruit you could discard, but the juice is the nectar for your sourdough starter. What you need to do is have an empty, clean bottle of water, add the juice inside this bottle, close the cap very tightly, and again, leave it in a dark place, covered tightly for 24 hours, and the next day you're gonna see that when you open the cap, it's gonna fizz or even pop depending on what fruit you use. So when you pick a fruit, think about something high in sugar. I did it with even mango the one time. You could even use dried fruits such as raisins or figs. This all should work. Now, after that juice has been fermenting in a closed container, you're ready to start the sourdough starter. Simply add equal parts juice to flour, mix it up, and allow it to ferment over time. You have to monitor the amount of time. It should take actually 12 to 24 hours to start seeing any type of fermentation. So after you see the first bubbles on top, that's when you could start to feed it. How to feed it at first, you discard half of the starter, throw it out. Then you add in equal parts flour and water. And this goes on constantly throughout a week or two until your starter has been accustomed to the temperature, to the flour that you're using, and it should grow over time. To really train your starter to be strong and powerful, you will need to feed your starter in ratios like 1 to 5 to 5 or even 1 to 10 to 10. This means that you have 1 part of starter to 5 parts of water and 5 parts of flour. That ratio is pretty drastic. However, it will allow your starter to grow more rapidly and actually become less sour and a little bit more sweet. My starter, I prefer to be on the sweeter side. It seems complicated, but if you're willing to go down that road, it is a long and tiring process doing sourdough. Next question is how to prevent dough balls from over fermenting outside of the fridge. So specifically, this person was commenting saying that they had a pizza pop-up or they're in a local market and they're selling multiple pizzas, maybe using like a portable pizza oven. And your dough might look good in the fridge. It might look nice and round, beautifully risen. However, when you take it out from the fridge and commute to the location, it will just over ferment, get kind of square in your dough boxes, and be flattened out. And this is due to the peak of the fermentation before you put it inside the refrigerator. So one major thing with pizza making that you can't really teach, but you have to get an eye for, is the dough's peak of fermentation. The variable here is time and temperature. Depending on how warm your area is, you will have to wait either less or more time for your dough to ferment and rise. So what I suggest to this person who's commenting, I suggest balling up your dough, and instead of leaving it to room temperature to ferment, I would add it straight to the fridge after balling. This way you can control the fermentation inside the fridge as well as outside the fridge. So when you pull it outside the fridge, your balls aren't going to over ferment quickly. It didn't have that proof at room temperature, so the time from when you remove it from the fridge can last maybe up until 2 to 3 hours, even 4 hours. So I hope this helps, but definitely control the peak fermentation of your dough. And if you have a long time from when you remove the dough from the fridge, right after balling your dough, add it straight to the fridge and you'll be fine. Next question, if you had one style of Neapolitan pizza to make for the rest of your life, which would it be? I have a bunch of recipes out there, and I suggest all of you to kind of dive in there and try out different styles using Polish, Biga, 100% Biga, Polish and Biga. I have crazy recipes out there. And yes, some perform better than the others. However, my basic go-to pizza would be my Polish pizza. I'll link it right here. This is actually the dough recipe I'm using in the video behind me. This recipe is just perfect for beginners. It's at a hydration that is comfortable for anybody or any beginner, and you get a pizza that is fluffy, soft, crunchy, and well fermented. It's my go-to every single time I make pizza at home. Now I have a question. It says, how to get my pizza dough softer? This is an interesting question because I, on the other hand, prefer a dough that is maybe a little bit more crispy, however, it has that nice fluff and softness. But to get your pizza dough softer is to first use a high temperature pizza oven. When you bake at a high temperature, it bakes for less time. And when you bake for less time, your dough is going to soften after it comes out of the oven. A crispier pizza usually happens from baking at a lower temperature and longer time. Also, you can add in certain ingredients into your dough to soften the gluten structure, like sugar or oil. Use these two in like 1 to 2% increments inside your dough, and you will see, and it actually becomes softer after you bake it outside the oven. Also, if you want a really soft dough, but it is difficult, I would suggest maybe hiring your hydration. Anywhere from 70% and up yields a dough with a more soft structure. Another question regarding sourdough starter. It says sourdough starter versus yeast. I think I put my opinion down there. I prefer yeast because it's more predictable, whereas sourdough starter, you really have to worry about the behavior of your starter, how it's rising, if it's sour or if it's sweet. And sourdough-based leavened products take forever to ferment. So here I do prefer yeast. However, yeast in the form of pre-ferments. So you take that yeast and you make a pre-ferment the day before you make your dough. This is going to kind of mimic a sourdough starter and gain those properties as a sourdough starter. You're going to smell the pre-ferment and it's going to smell nice, sweet. It could even smell alcoholic, but this is going to give flavor and structure to your dough when you mix it. Another important thing, when you do dive into the sourdough world, do not add any yeast, any man-made commercial yeast like dry active yeast, fresh yeast, or instant yeast. Do not add that into your sourdough starter. It ruins the purpose. Sourdough starter is made from natural wild yeasts to feed on your flour and to provide nutrition and flavor for your baked product. So when you do make a sourdough starter, keep it simple. Only feed it one certain flour, whether it be a white flour or a whole wheat flour. Mine happens to be only white flour, and I go from feeding it bread flour to all-purpose flour to 00 flour. All right, thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed the video behind me as well. Thank you for your questions that you have commented. I'm gonna see you in the next video.